TDS Radio, your girl So Fab here, Coach Block, and we are still in the middle of our W.I.N series. It's Women Impacting Now. You guys should know this by now. And today we have a very special guest in the building. We have Miss Allison Wood of DaVinci Education. She is the CEO and co-founder of her company. And today we're definitely going to get a little into not only about her company, who she is, but just following an unconventional path. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But before we get into anything else, how are you?
I'm good, Kim. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, I'm so glad you could make it. So thank you.
You
thank
bet.
you. So can you please let the audience know a little bit about your company, DaVinci Education, and essentially kind of give them an in-depth look of what it's about?
Sure. So DaVinci Education is a software company. We actually started at the School of Medicine at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
We have a software platform that basically helps them kind of run their whole educational program for the medical students. So everything from their grades to their course schedules, how they evaluate their faculty, how they're doing in their clinical experiences, even how the school is meeting its accreditation requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very complex piece of software, and it was built inside the School of Medicine, and we spun it out, my technical co-founder and I, back in 2011. And we've been around now for a little over a decade. Thank you. Have grown very intentionally and organically. And so I have a team of 15 other people who work with me. And we serve about 30 programs around the country, medical schools, dental schools, veterinary colleges, things like that.
Awesome.
And it's a real joy to help educate the folks who are going to end up taking care of us and our loved ones and our pets and, children and grandchildren and everything. So we do a little bit of our part to help them get a better education.
That is awesome. And the one thing about startups, typically when people are thinking about that step into being an entrepreneur, or just even a startup, is finding their niche. Where is that need and how they can essentially solve a problem. So what was your thought process between you and, your co-founder of, okay, we're seeing some of these loopholes here. How can we fill them?
That's a really interesting question. So I should probably set the stage here and say that my co-founder was actually my husband at the time. So we moved here from Los Angeles in 2005, 3 days after the Tar Heels won the national championship. I'll always remember that because I'm like, why are all these people on this street called Franklin? I don't understand it. So it was a job at the School of Medicine at Duke, and he was a programmer. And it was really just to build a system internally for the School of Medicine to use to measure some of these things. And he did such a good job with it. They said, well, why don't we also make it do this and make it do this and make it do this? And after a number of years, we actually talked to some of the folks at Duke, and they said, Duke Medical School is not the only medical school that could use this, right? Yeah. There's other programs that might benefit. So that's where the idea of a startup and a spin out came from. And I think we both had entrepreneurial genes, that we had never really had a chance to exercise. And there's so much that we didn't know, right? But we said, this sounds exciting and great. So we walked out of Duke with 3 clients, Duke, the University of Kansas, my alma mater. I'm a 4th generation Jayhawk, and Yale School of Medicine. Awesome. We walked out the door with those 3 clients and then just started doing it,
That is awesome. That's awesome. And one of the things that we talked about with a lot of our ladies earlier this month was just community and support. So how important was it for you to have that person that you can go through this journey with, when typically some people are kind of fighting by themselves?
Yeah. You're talking about the co-founder? Yeah. So during those early years, it was absolutely important. And there's times when you are just like, why are we doing this? Right. And you have to look at each other and say, we believe in this. And then there was the added element, right, of we had so much at stake because this is our family.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we were very committed to it. And he's no longer a part of the business, and we're no longer married. And both of those transitions were very difficult.
I'm sure it was.
But I still believe in what we built, and I've continued to build value in the company since then, and I'm really proud of that. But I think in addition to support of your co-founder, and I think it would be very difficult to found a company by yourself, because if nothing else, it's like they say, it's lonely at the top, right?
Absolutely.
Even of a very small organization. So you do need somebody to turn to. And that's why we're sitting here in the space of American Underground, which has been a great resource for me for many years. Organizations like the CED, Council for Entrepreneurial Development here in Raleigh. I'm a big fan of raising my hand and opening my mouth, right? And learning from other people. And it's amazing what you can just kind of soak up, and you might not even use it right away, but you kind of plant it. And you just keep layering on as much advice and insight as you can get. And And that support can kind of manifest itself at unexpected times. And all of a sudden you'll have an idea, and that idea was planted because you had a conversation with somebody
Absolutely.
3, 4, 5, 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then even just finding your voice, because that was a theme that we talked about this month as well, where sometimes women have a difficulty finding their voice, or just being in a room full of people, you know, who are men or whatever have you, or have the years of experience, where you might have that intimidation. Was that ever an issue for you at all?
You know, it really wasn't. And I'm grateful and pretty surprised at that, because I think software is a male-dominated business, right? Technology, even university spin-outs. I mean, just business in general. Sometimes I think if we're not tuned into it, if we're not listening for it, sometimes we don't hear it. In that case, it's a blessing, right? But I think that I also am someone who tends to focus on the positive. And so I'm always kind of looking for the yes and the optimism. And like I said, if it was there, maybe I just tuned it out, right? But I don't feel like I've suffered from it. And I'm very grateful.
Absolutely.
Very grateful to have not faced those obstacles, because I know many, many women have and still do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when it comes to, you know, having a startup, what was the most rewarding thing that you can say came out of it?
Well, I'm still in it. So you mean came out of like at the beginning, or just sort of realizing what's possible? You know, it's like we're doing this thing and nobody has done this thing before, right? And it hasn't blown up yet. So I guess we can keep doing this thing. And I think gathering people around me who share my vision, right? And who somehow I happen to inspire, right? I mean, I must be doing something right to have assembled the team that I have around me. And that continues to be one of the best parts of it for me, is feeling how that energy is kind of accumulating around me, you know, as we keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, of course, what was some of the challenging things that you have experienced or currently are experiencing, you know, with being in a startup?
What are some of those?
Yeah.
Oh, Lordy, we only have a few minutes here, Kim. I think one of the things is, and this is something that we didn't realize, right? So we're going out, you know, we have this piece of software that was quite a good piece of software. Like, we're going to go sell this to medical schools. What we didn't know about selling to universities, right? Business to business, enterprise software, the resources that it would take, not just to sell it, to support it, to service it, to continue to develop it. We had just that entrepreneurial spirit, right? We kept pushing through, but looking back, there's a reason people raise money, right? Or there's a reason people have business plans. So they say, this is going to take this much. And if you can't do that, your chances of success are pretty slim. And again, I plead ignorance, right? I guess I tuned that out. But when you think about the fact that 90% of small businesses fail, and within the first 5 years is the statistic I've heard. And, you know, we're still here 11 years later, and we're small, but we're doing really well. So there is a lot to be said for persistence.
Absolutely.
A lot. And you can't persist without good people around you, and who will call your BS, right?
Hello.
And tell you, you know, or you're not thinking about this, or be careful. And I've had a number of folks around me for whom I am very grateful, who have done that for me. But the challenge is I think a lot of people are surprised that I haven't quit before now. And I think that was probably a combination, like I said, of having personal and professional wrapped together, and also just not wanting to fail, even though failure is a huge part of the entrepreneurial experience, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. But then if you're a competitive type A person like me, it's like, yeah, but I don't really want to fail. What would I do? And I'm very proud to have, you know, survived all the things we've survived. And there's probably a lot more ahead of us.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then when it comes to, you know, as you're saying, just having the failures and the perseverance, and, you know, just telling yourself, like, the failures are going to come, but I don't really want to deal with them. You know, how do you stay out of your head, you know, because it's tough when those voices are telling you, just quit.
It is tough. And I think that's a really good question, because I think I didn't have really a big business background. I was in marketing and I did writing and things like that, but I'd never run a business. I'd never built a business. And so I had a lot to learn about being a leader. And early on, I had worked with a peer group. And so they did a kind of a 360 survey, and my team got to give input on what kind of leader I was. And it was ugly, man. It's like you're defensive, you shut down, you're rude, you slam the door. And I think, unfortunately, there were challenges going on with me and my co-founder at the time, and the business was just struggling through early years of adversity. And that doesn't continue to haunt me, but I'll never forget it, right? Because I'm a much different leader today. I'm a much better leader, in part because of that feedback. But I never want to slip back into that, right? And so then the challenge becomes, for example, if I came across as defensive or kind of cut people off, then how does that translate to now when I have an opinion and I'm a leader and I have a decision to make? There was a time when I would say, oh, are people going to think I'm cutting them off? And you get to a point in your leadership experience where you're like, it doesn't really matter what they think. Right. If that's the right thing for me to do, I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to be mean-spirited. But this is my job as a leader to make this decision. And I can't control how people feel. I can control how I show up in the world. Absolutely. And how I respond to folks and the level of compassion and consideration that I bring. Absolutely. But I am unapologetic is a word that I like to use. And I think that has to do in part with how old I am, but also the experience I've had. And it's a wonderfully comfortable place to be, which doesn't mean I have all the answers or I know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but it means I can trust myself, right? And that my basic radar and instincts are solid and they're rooted in what I know is best for myself and my business. So yeah, it's a great question.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit more about feedback. We do have to take a quick break, but once we do, we'll be back to talk a little bit more about not only feedback, but your path as well. Because I'm interested to hear about this cabaret singing. I want to know more.
All right.
So we will be right back. It's TDS Radio, our voice, our culture. TDS Radio, So Fab Kim here with Coach Block, and we are in the middle of our W.I.N series. We have Miss Allison Wood here of DaVinci Education, and we were talking a little bit more about just the path of your startup, how you got here, some of the things that you've endured so far, those voices in the back of your head, having a good community, a good team, which I think is a wonderful foundation to have because your team keeps you level, and one of the things that you hit on was feedback. And I think when it comes to being an entrepreneur, there are little things that you really need to be mindful of. And one of them is feedback. Customer reviews, things like that. They're not always going to be good. Your feedback isn't always going to be good. So for anyone who is an entrepreneur, who's in a startup or, who is just really kind of testing the waters and not quite sure if they want to jump, but they've gotten some feedback, they've done some testing, what advice could you give to them so they don't beat themselves up?
That's another really good question. So I think, first of all, it matters who you're getting the feedback from, right?
Yes.
And so when we talk about a network, you want to surround yourself with people who are straight shooters. And you want people in your network who will support you too. Sometimes you need that shoulder of just pat you on the back and go, honey, whatever you do is just fine. Have a piece of cake, but you do need people who will be candid with you. And I think a lot of people aren't comfortable with candid conversation, and it certainly can feel hurtful if we internalize feedback. And I think that's why how you get the feedback and who you get it from really matters. I do think it's important to get feedback that's challenging, right?
Absolutely.
Feedback is a gift, and that's how we grow. And it's okay to disagree with feedback too. And that's one of the things you learn is that you don't have to agree just because someone tells you that's how they interpreted something you did or said or acted on. It doesn't mean that's the truth. It's that how they perceived it. It's an opportunity for future or for further conversation, right? Well, tell me that's interesting that you perceived it that way. Tell me more about that. I don't want to come off as defensive or whatever. And then you have to take that and wrap it back into, yourself and not lose yourself, right? So don't beat yourself up. Like you said, that's really important. And I think as women, and I hate to generalize along gender lines, but I think as women, we tend to internalize things and we tend to make them more emotional or psychological in terms of how they impact us, right? And there's positives to that. And that can also be destructive in some ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your path.
Okay.
Because reading up about you, you were a copywriter, you were executive communications firm, in an executive communications firm, you're a singer, so when you have this diverse background where you have experience from all different pathways, how did you find out that this was your passion?
I just love all these questions. Okay. So, because I've thought about this one a lot. So when I was doing all those things and I had young children, I was a stay-at-home mom. And again, this is with my husband at the time, who we founded the company together. So he was very supportive of me being a stay-at-home mom, but I always knew I had professional ambitions, right? And we would joke, there was one time, went to our kids' grade school and there was an assembly in the auditorium and the PTA president got up and said, we need a PTA president. And I thought, I want to volunteer for that. And he looked at me and he was supportive, but he said, how are you going to monetize that? And I'm like, I'm not, but I almost felt like a calling. Right. And what I have realized since then is I spent a couple of years doing that and this PTA presidency of an elementary school, and it taught me leadership skills. Right. And so I did that and I did the cabaret singing, which got me in front of audiences, and parenting is a huge parallel to entrepreneurship and raising a company, right? And so I would look at someone like my brother, who's a very accomplished businessman, and he had a very linear path in his career. And I would compare myself, as we tend to do, and I would be like, well, I'm hopping all over here. What are all these crazy things I'm doing? What's it all going to lead to?
Right.
I asked myself that question, and I never planned for it to lead to this. But running a software company, but every day I wake up and I say, this role has been transformative for me. I can't imagine doing anything else. And I think what led me here was making authentic choices for where I was in the moment, right? And so answering that call to be the PTA president, I can't tell you why I did it exactly. I'm not going to be able to write out a description, but I kind of followed my gut based on what I knew about myself. Absolutely. And so it's that combination of self-knowledge and instinct and adventure. And then you kind of just have to trust that it's going to add up to something. And wherever your path ends, if you've been making authentic choices along the way, then I really believe that you'll be where you're supposed to be. Right. So that's kind of what's led me here.
Preach today. Come on, Allison.
Sister, I will preach. I will follow your preaching. I will raise my hands to your preaching.
So when we talk about things like, activities or hobbies or anything like that, where you said, these are all teaching you skills. I don't think people really take the time to think about that. It's just like, oh, it's just a hobby. But there's a lot that's within that hobby, or there's a lot that's within that skill, or even that position that you were in that can ultimately take you elsewhere. And one thing that you said was, you just had a conversation with yourself. How important is it to be self-aware, to know yourself and what it is that you do and don't like, and differentiate between a hobby and this is something that I love?
Yeah. It's very important to know yourself. I think I'm 58 years old and I feel like I've known myself for about the last 3 years, so it takes a long time, but it doesn't mean that a 25-year-old can't know themselves for where they are right now, right? You have to kind of give yourself the space to grow and change, even though none of us know what change is going to look like for us, right? So that, again, is a little bit of an act of faith, a leap of faith. I think when you talk about whether something's a hobby or, professional passion or whatever, it comes back to that authenticity, right? I think the important thing to realize is that everything you do adds up to the leader you are, the person you are, the employee you are, the parent you are. It all plays into it, right? And so I almost don't think of it as the personal or professional. I do think it's important to separate those things, especially if you're an entrepreneur, right? You have to carve out time that has nothing to do with the business. That was particularly hard for me in my situation because we were married and we had a family. And if we took time away from the business, we effectively were taking time away from supporting our family. It was very, very challenging to balance all that. But I think thinking of those things as a trade-off I prefer to think of them as a blend, right? And making sure that you have that time. In order to know yourself, you have to spend time with yourself.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so that I think is important. And especially for women who tend to get pulled in a lot of directions if they have families or parents they're caring for or something like that.
Absolutely.
Selfish is not a bad word.
Hello. Can we say that again?
Selfish is not a bad word.
Yes. So we have to take one more break and then have a couple more questions for Allison here, and then we're going to wrap it up so you can follow her and learn more about her. So make sure you guys keep it right here. It's TDS Radio, our voice, our culture. TDS Radio. So fab, Coach Block here, and we are still in the middle of our Women Impacting Now series, W.I.N, and we have Allison Wood today. So happy you could be a part of this, this segment that we have, because you're awesome, you're insightful, and I love that.
Thank you.
And one of the things that you actually said off air that kind of blends into what I wanted to ask you was just taking your time. Taken in the moment. And I think, after the conversation that we just had is where everything is just instant gratification. It's instant, anything you want, Amazon, instant, overnight delivery, everything is instant. People don't take the time to enjoy things anymore. So even with having a startup, being an entrepreneur, sometimes you get so caught up in your work and what you're doing and making a difference. How do you slow down and prevent burnout, or just take the time to just breathe?
That's so interesting. Well, I have a new relationship in my life, a wonderful man, and named Jeff.
Hi,
and
Jeff.
That has, hi, Jeff. And that has really helped me put some things in perspective, right? Because I love the work that I do. And for the longest time, people would say, well, what do you do for a break? I'm like, I don't need a break. I love my work. This is great. Or I'll just read my, business report slowly at the beach. And it's like, that's not the same thing. So, he's really helped me put things in perspective, right? And I think it's interesting because as you get older, I want to slow down. And at the same time, you're very conscious of time going by faster, right? So in some ways, you would think that younger people might be the ones who'd be like, I got all the time in the world, but they're the ones sometimes that are going at such a fast speed. And I think there comes a point in your life, depending on circumstances, but also on age, where you say, I want to slow down so that I can savor the moments. And then you start to make even more authentic choices, hopefully, about, well, how am I spending my time? With what kind of people do I want to spend my time? How do I want to spend my professional efforts if I have a choice in that matter? So, so it's about being authentic. It's about being intentional, right? It's about recognizing that the personal things that I do to feed myself, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, will contribute to the kind of leader I am. So if leading that business is so important to me, then I better feed that part of myself. So it's kind of a combination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for the relationship. Yay. I love love. Oh my goodness.
It's a pretty good thing.
Yay.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you were talking to yourself 10 years ago, and you're thinking about this company, you have the butterflies in your stomach, you're kind of in that place of, should we jump? What would you say to yourself, or would you have done anything differently?
It's interesting. I did a podcast with my daughter, who's a stand-up comedian in New York City, several months ago, and it was parents and their comics and their parents. It's called It's Genetic, and it was really fun. And so one of the questions that the gal asked, it was sort of a newlywed game, kind of a back and forth. So she asked my daughter Maddie to say something about me that she thought I might not know. And anyway, she said, Maddie, what's one piece of advice that your mom, would give you? And she said, oh, I know what it is, because she's given it to me. And that is to be bold. And so you asked me what I would have told myself 10 years ago, but that's true 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And the further back I go, the more loudly I would have said it, right? Because I think I grew up in the Midwest. I'm kind of, not shy, but just kind of, nice and normal and middle of the road. And being bold is nothing to be ashamed of, right? Absolutely. It has to come, though, from a place of confidence and that authenticity. So you kind of have to know yourself in order to be bold. But I still would have given myself that advice 10 years ago, I think. And also, it's not, maybe don't take things too personally, would have been the other part of that, right? Because if you're bold, you're kind of putting yourself out there, and you sort of have to be able to let things roll off your back. And not doubt yourself, right? This goes back to the feedback question that you asked. You need to internalize feedback if it can help you grow, but it's not all going to help you grow, right? Absolutely. And you have to just keep knowing yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Allison, I really enjoyed this interview
with
you.
I have too. Thank you. Thank you.
You're just so insightful and inspiring.
Thank you, Kim.
Usually I don't ask a question.
I was going to say, usually you don't ask anything.
I don't ask a question, but
Yes,
I'm just intrigued because you've taken this pathway. So for those who are watching, I'm the engineering behind the scenes. What advice would you give to the mothers? Because you're doing this as a mom, and I do know with, my current fiance and my ex-wife, at times they put motherhood in front of the goals. What advice would you give to moms out there who are thinking about it and wanting to push? I know it's be bold, but at the end of the day, moms always say, we're going to err on the side of the kids and make sure home and everything is cool. So I would just like to know what advice you would give to moms.
Thank you, Ken. I think that's a great question. It is a very tough challenge, right? Because you're choosing between two things that really matter to you. And it comes back to the authenticity though, right? And we had the same struggle, right? So there were a lot of years when I didn't work because we just said, it was important. And luckily my husband was supportive of me being home with the kids and everything. I don't think I could have done this, quite honestly, when my kids were young. So now they're 25, 22, and 20. So I think you just have to make, the best choices you can every day. But it is important to recognize that the time with your children will pass and you will not get a second chance. So it would have to be for me personally, it'd have to be a pretty compelling business opportunity for me to choose the business over the children. And I don't think that's even what you're asking me necessarily, but what that comes down to on a daily basis is you're making choices. Should I spend this hour on work or this hour with the kids? And I would just say your time with your kids will be fleeting and you won't get that opportunity back.
Right. Great answer.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a great question. Yeah, it was a great question. Now, that said, I think mothers can do anything. And I think there are a lot of lessons I learned, like I said, from parenting about being responsible for the health and well-being of another entity, which in this case is the business, and how you are supportive without being dominating. And when there is a time to lead, when there is a time to listen and be supportive, and all those things are lessons that you can learn as a parent as well. So they definitely can play off of each other. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm so glad, like I said, that you sat down with us, that you were able to, not only tell us a little bit about your business, but yourself as well, and be transparent. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But can you also let people know, how they can find you, how they can follow your business, how they can find out more about you?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Allison Wood, and the company is DaVinci Education. That's probably the easiest way to find me. I'm not very active on Twitter or social media. I may have to change that if I'm going to be on the podcast circuit. But basically DaVinci Education, I'm very proud of that company. And I think it might be interesting to folks to check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Kim.
And you're now officially a part of the TDS family. So whenever you would love to come back, we are here.
I love it. Nothing like family.
And thank you guys once again for tuning in for our W.I.N series. Make sure you guys keep it locked right here. It's TDS Radio, our voice, our culture.